design day.
It will be on Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Actually on Wednesday, we saw all those little diagrams
Wednesday.
in the presentation.
Do you have maybe the figures? It's because there are a couple that are almost the same, and you also have an edge that say time, and if I say, okay, this is the time, this, for example, this is here, and you
They're
have a line
occurring
between
in the
them.
same semester.
Yes.
They're in the same semester, and they're at the same time in the same semester, so you can link them. In other words, you know, you and Alvaro teach two different courses, but at the same time.
Yes, but
Okay.
what if it has a line between them?
Okay, here's the
That's the line.
presentation.
You
Ah,
link them.
okay.
That somehow you get together with Alvaro and maybe, okay, if they're at the same, all right, if they're at the same time,
Which one is it?
Yes.
oh,
Okay, here we have these two,
see,
okay, and
that's
those are joined
conventional,
together.
right. Now, joined together means that you teach maybe at 8 o'clock, Alvaro teaches at 9 o'clock, but you have the same students.
Okay,
So
Same
courses are
students.
joined back to
So
back.
it's a block.
okay.
So that sometimes you might have them for an hour and a half, and he has them for a half hour.
But it doesn't have to be the same course.
No, they are different.
No, they're
courses.
different courses, different
Okay.
subjects.
Okay.
Although at MIT, that big block course, same students, yeah, different subjects, different instructors, different subjects.
Okay, and these and these.
Related subjects?
Yes, it's the core engineering. And in fact, if you go to online courseware and you look up, it's 16. 16 is the course, the program in aerospace. So 16.01, 02, 03, 04. Okay? And it will give you the syllabus, and you will see it's about 8 different courses. Not a full course, but 8 different disciplines with about 8 different instructors. But they don't teach the whole semester. They might teach, they teach a certain number of lectures.
Like 4
So they might
weeks or
teach 4
something.
weeks.
Okay, this is because I was thinking about something that we have been discussing with Juan Carlos about a project that we are interested in developing. And so I realized that we saw that, and maybe each of one instructor can help us to develop the same project on the 2 different courses. So that's because I was reviewing this, but for example, between this and this, which one is the difference?
Oh, the first one, the conventional, just
Yes.
means that this is how we're doing it. 2 separate courses, 2 separate instructors, they don't talk to each other. There's no linkage there.
Okay.
So this is suggesting the simultaneous is, okay, at least start by talking to the other instructor, even though you might have different students. Maybe for some things during the semester, if there's a room large enough, you put your 2 groups together for a common topic. Well, they're related. I mean, you wouldn't,
And in some sessions will be synchronized. We had a course in our diploma for information security in which one of my colleagues taught them in the class about some security problems. And then in my class, in another course, I gave them the solution or some workarounds they could do to solve the problem. That would be the example of a two simultaneous
But
programs.
this is, I was thinking about this.
Yeah.
For that.
That one.
Yes, you see? That's because I'm so confused.
Those
well,
are
look at
separated.
the backbone one, the backbone one and this merged one. They're essentially the same thing, only in the first one, they stay separate in the project, they merge for the project at the end. Oh, actually, they actually merge, so there's more than that's the difference. The classes meet together. Same project, different, that was the example I gave you about, because I know of a course that MIT had biology and mechanical engineering. And they were
But this
separate
is-
and they merged.
But this is about the project
That's
because,
about the project.
because I thought that maybe it was quite similar, you know, if you have,
Yes.
here
And
are
the
the project and
difference-
you.
The difference in the other one is that the project starts at the beginning of the semester and runs the whole semester. And the classes don't necessarily merge. They stay separate classes with their own instructors, but when they have lab time and they go to the lab, they're working on the same project. So at some point, you had to have them all together to explain the project. And they might have to work together at some point at lab time. They might have to have a common lab time. But that's the difference.
In the book, those are more explained in the text?
I think so. They're in the book. I'm
Okay, I
assuming
can review
it's,
it for more detail.
yeah,
Thank
on
you.
page, 90 case. Okay. Well, we remember this design model from the beginning of the week, okay? And today we're going to look at, so sometimes if you look at this, you say, oh my goodness, we did a lot this week. You know, we looked at learning outcomes, stakeholder input, external criteria, if you have accreditation criteria that you're trying to meet. We looked at different kinds of benchmarking. We looked at the structure. This is where we looked at those little diagrams. How to sequence the courses, how to map them. We didn't say a lot about co-curricular experiences. This means these are projects or activities that students are engaged in outside their class courses. In Europe, they do a lot like this, in the US as well, with this Formula One racing car. That group meets, or you have an engineering club, and they do things.
Like maybe like the Microsoft cells or what the IEEE.
Yeah,
And
they're activities that the students do. Now, I'm sure they do other co-curricular, sometimes it's called extracurricular, it's the same thing. But here we're talking specifically engineering activities, but that are not attached to a course. And so the question is, can you assign some of those learning outcomes to those experiences? Because they are going to meet some of those, and you can, as long as it's not the only place. Because remember, if only some of the students do these experiences, it can't be the only place that they will see, for example, at leadership. If leadership is an important learning outcome, and you know they're going to learn it there, I would say, okay, they're going to learn it there, but it can't be the only place, unless every student does this co-curricular experience. Now, I had an extended conversation yesterday morning with the internship program, the people who do the internship. This will be, and we talked a lot, and that they are now aware that you are defining learning outcomes. This will be, in case I forget to talk about it as a method, a great source of information, of data for you to evaluate your curriculum. Because and I think they're very willing to look at what are your specific learning outcomes and how can we build that into the information that they collect and how they evaluate the students in their internship. Okay? So their reports, you know, and you might be able to persuade them to create a rubric. Okay, in addition to, because they collect a lot of narrative data. But sometimes if you specifically want to say, how are they doing with communication in English? And so then you have the employer grading it, you have the supervisor, and you can have the student. But you already have that experience in place, and it's already supervised, and they're already looking at least the common competencies. So Buenos dias, Diana.
Yes.
So that internship is going to be potentially a great source of information. And we talked about it with them quite a bit. So I think they're very, because they came to the session on Wednesday morning, and they liked what they heard. So I think that will make a nice connection with your program, with the internship department. As well as Alessandra is not here, these will be important connections. You know, she now understands where the direction you're going in, and I think maybe you've had an opportunity to see a little bit more of the direction and the kinds of support that office can provide. Because I wanted to follow up on yesterday, when I was telling you that how in the aerospace department, when they were beginning their curriculum reform, Ed Crowley hired me, looked just at assessment, okay? That's a luxury that most programs do not have. So I don't want you to think that around the world, all of these CDIO programs have an evaluation specialist that works with them, okay? Naval Academy has one, KTH has one, Singapore Polytech. But many schools work with their teaching learning center. École Polytech Montréal had a well-developed teaching learning center. They've had one for about 35 years. They've been tremendous support for the program. So if you have those centers locally, that's going to be great support.
Doris, did the people of the employment center show you the rubrics they use for?
No, we met just at the conference, so we didn't have
I see. I'm going to tell you just as a quick bird's eye view what they ask.
Okay.
They ask about lifelong learning.
Yep.
They ask about critical thinking.
Look at your common competencies.
About the general quality of the work, solution of problems related to the work, the capacity to plan and organize their own work, their level of achievement, and the adequate usage of resources for the work. And then conditions of the person, the self-esteem, responsibility, and all that, social abilities, effective work with others, and effective work of the person. The rubric includes all that.
So when you have, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, when you already have existing data collection going on, don't recreate it yourself. Don't say, okay, now I'm going to have to assess my students in the internship. There already is an assessment going on. When you read the reports, you pull out of those reports the ones that relate to your program outcomes, and you don't have to summarize the rest of it. You just pull out of it what pertains to the part that you're collecting. But whenever you're doing evaluation, and we talked about this right from the start, you want to go back to what are the key questions you're trying to answer. Why did you start the curriculum reform? Because remember, you're trying to say, after all this, is our curriculum better now than it was before? Right? Or is it as good as it was before, only now we can do it more efficiently with fewer resources? So it doesn't necessarily have to be better, but of course you have to define what does it mean that it's better. Okay? But go back to your list of why you wanted a new curriculum to begin with. Because that's going to be one of the key questions for doing the evaluation. Again, It's the same principle. You want to collect only as much data at this point as is going to answer your evaluation question. So if your evaluation question is, are more students attracted to systems engineering, and are they staying in the program? If that is why if that's one of the reasons why you changed your curriculum, right, then gather just enough data to answer that question. Okay? So you gather the data for specific questions. If that was not a concern for curriculum evaluation, you don't have to track that data. And my guess is that someone in the university is monitoring that data, is collecting that data about how many students are admitted, what the retention rates are. So again, you don't have to create your own survey or record keeping. You can answer that question with existing data. Right? And you say, but that's not all. We also wanted to know. Okay. Do we meet, maybe it's to meet the requirements of an accreditation group. And does the new curriculum meet those requirements? And you see what those requirements are, and you take some measures. Okay. Sometimes you want to know, are our students happier, more satisfied? Happy is a tough word there because, you say, are you happy to be in school? Or I say to you, are you happy to be here this week? Well, happy is probably a stretch, Okay. But if I ask you, are you satisfied with what you learned this week? What's your level of satisfaction with what you think you've accomplished? Okay, that's a different question. And that's an important question for students. Because most of the time, if students are unhappy, it's because they don't feel they are really learning something, or they're not getting their money's worth. Okay. So depending on what your question is, again, think about, if you say, is our curriculum better than it was before? Well, what are the criteria that's going to say, well, what is a good curriculum? From our perspective, what would it mean to say this curriculum? What would the curriculum have to look like for us to say it's better than it was before? And maybe you don't have to look at all parts of your curriculum. Maybe you want to look at, the learning outcomes. Maybe you want to look at the preparation of faculty to move this new curriculum forward. Okay, and so you kind of look at, well, where are the faculty now? Where are they going to be? But you don't start out by saying, okay, I have to measure everything. I have to know about faculty, I have to know about retention rates, I have to know about the learning outcomes to meet the ABET. Okay. What was your question to begin with? Okay. In terms of your curriculum. And then decide what evidence will you collect. Keeping in mind that there may be some existing data. Somebody's already collecting it, so don't reinvent the wheel. There's a Spanish expression I learned yesterday that means that don't reinvent the wheel, don't start over if it's already been done. Had to do with hot water?
Similar.
With hot water? Oh, you say
No
don't
inventar la
reinvent the
rueda.
wheel.
Sí,
Okay.
yeah.
But what's the one
Descubrir
with
el agua
the, what's the one
tibia.
with the hot water? Making hot water.
Descubrir el agua tibia. Descubrir el agua tibia.
To discover tepid water. It's like discovering sliced bread or something.
Oh,
in
all right. The
in
best
United
invention since sliced bread?
Yeah.
Okay. And sometimes, depending on who you have to persuade, you might want to summarize the data different ways, depending on if you have to persuade, as Gonzalo is this morning, trying to persuade the people holding the purse strings, that we have an exciting curriculum, and students are, that's a different, they don't want to see all the numbers about student retention over the last 10 years, okay? And it's not that that's not important data, but different stakeholder group. Okay? If you need to report internally to El Decano Gonzalo, it might look, although I get the impression he's as much of the reporting process as the person you're reporting to, which is wonderful. Okay, so what are we talking about in terms of, when I keep using the word evidence, and sometimes I go back and forth with evidence and data, if you want to show, if your question is, do we have a clear mission, objectives, values, and what program outcomes, here's some of the things what do you look for? Do you even have a mission statement? And does anybody know where it is? Okay. Can faculty and students, do they know what the mission is? Articulate, can they express it? Can they describe it? Okay. What the mission statement is. And you might do the same thing with the mission and values. All right. Again, if that's your question. If your question is related to, if your curriculum evaluation is related to, do you have clear program outcomes, all right? Then you look at the documentation, first of all. Document the process you are going through. Because as you finalize that list of program outcomes, okay, there's a document that's going to provide evidence of curriculum redesign. Okay. So all along the way, collect that evidence. Okay. We have program learning outcomes, here they are. And you might even, in a report, describe, here's how we got there. Here's where we got to the point we are. Here are our validation studies. Here's how we know we have the right learning outcomes, because maybe that's a key question. Are we addressing the right learning outcomes in our curriculum? Okay. How do you get the data? Check in with your stakeholders. Here you might have to, as we've looked at, design your own survey. It's not data that the university, that ASASI is already collecting. Okay. If for you there's a value, if your new curriculum will be an integrated curriculum, okay, then again, what's the evidence you want to collect? Document both the process and the final plan. Your curriculum map is going to be an important source of data for that curriculum evaluation. So notice, I'm not saying, let's not be counting everything and getting means and standard deviations, okay? The evidence is in the document that you've produced, okay? And you show where the learning outcomes are included. Then you go to, actually this is the other area, because this is kind of the planning process. And then at some point, you have some data about students' acquisition of the essential skills. Okay? So this is now getting to the learning assessment piece and collecting data. And we've already talked about that yesterday. The input that most of that data is going to come from within the courses, and then you look at it across the courses. But remember, when you're looking at it across the courses, you just can't look at that final grade and say students are achieving the outcomes because they got an A in this course and a B+ in this course and a C in this course and a D. That doesn't tell you anything, which is what we've been basing it on, because how do we judge the success of students in the curriculum? We look at their grade point average. You're graduating with, do you have a 4-point scale? 5-point scale?
5 points.
Okay. You're graduating at a 4.7. Tells me I've been pretty successful in this program. Okay. And if your original question was simply, are students, achieving more or learning more based on that measure, then you look at that measure, what were students getting in terms of grade point average? But to me, that's not a helpful question and not a helpful answer. To know that the average, because the average grade point average, it's going to be average, but you know that, that's what an average is. So you're going to say, well, our student body, it was at an average of, you know, a C plus before, and they're at a C plus now, that's an average. So it doesn't really tell you anything about, that A doesn't tell you anything about whether they've achieved the subject learning outcomes. It might if you were looking just at one course. So that you know, to get an A overall, they had to do pretty well with achieving most of those learning outcomes. But across courses, at the end of the curriculum, gives you no information about who has achieved which learning outcomes. High student interest in their chosen career area. Okay. Earlier, Alvaro asked me, what about student motivation and student interest? Okay. Some of the indicators overall, are they still in your program? Do they still want to be engineers when they finish? Okay. Do they look for jobs? Now the idea of their getting jobs, because sometimes we track what's the percentage of students who really get engineering jobs. Okay. That's an important measure, but it doesn't always answer the high interest, because getting a job in engineering is only partly the result of a student's preparation. You have the whole outside world of engineering that affects whether or not a student gets a job. What does the economy look like? What are the available jobs? What are the jobs in this person's home area? Okay, so sometimes, in fact, in this Gordon Leadership Program at MIT, the donor, Bernard Gordon, his main criteria for success of the program that he was going to fund, which he did fund, was, are the students leaders in industry? Do they become leaders in industry? Do they go into engineering, and do they stay and become leaders? Because that's what we're preparing them for. It's a leadership program. Okay. Well, I could not make anyone understand that our responsibility in the university really stops when we don't have them anymore. And the most we can take responsibility for is when they leave us, are they prepared to take on those kinds of roles? Okay. Are they still motivated to want to do engineering? Because so much happens in the engineering workplace. If they don't have opportunities to do the whole range of, we can prepare them in the CDIO process, if they take a job and in their job, they never have opportunities to do that. They never have opportunities to become leaders. That's not the fault of the program. See, but employers, and this is the same when I worked in corporate education, and I was doing corporate training. Again, the managers in the companies, in the industry, wanted to hold the training program responsible if their bottom line didn't improve. Because they said, we're sending them for training because we want to improve our return on investment. Well, there's a big stretch between by the time I have you in one quality course and seeing the results on the company's return on investment. And again, I try to explain, the training program can only be responsible to say you now have the necessary knowledge and skills to go out and make a difference in your company. but we have no control, and neither would I take any responsibility if they never had an opportunity to make a difference in their company, because that depended on the situation there. So I think this motivation, you know, how far out, and the same thing too about one of your, you know, part of your mission, well, your mission is to make Colombia a better country. Okay? So you have to say, I mean, we want to take credit if it is becoming a better country. I had a part of that. But what if it doesn't make really good progress? In a lot of ways, we can't go back and hold you completely responsible for that. There are just too many other factors. So we have to say, yes, I'm willing to take responsibility for the fact that when they left our program, they really were not ready. Okay? That's my job. That's my sphere of influence. But there are too many other societal and family and personal things. Okay, and if we thought that, you know, students, it was important in the students' development that we provide them with opportunities to learn and work together outside the classroom, then we look at what kind of opportunities did we have before and how many students participated, what are they doing now. So it depends on, one, what's your vision for your new curriculum? Okay. And how close are you getting to that vision? But same thing with teaching and learning experiences. Okay. The first one is really looking at, are those program outcomes, did they make their way into the courses, and are you providing students with opportunities to develop them? Now, if these are not important parts of the vision of your curriculum, if it's not important that you look at introducing a lot of new different teaching methods, it's not something you collect data about. Okay? Always go back to your vision. And again, high levels, always, in addition to collecting data about student achievement, it's always helpful to do student satisfaction. Same thing with engineering workspaces. Some people, actually in the CDIO process, there was a school at the University of Pretoria. They pretty much had revised their curriculum and had a lot of things in place. They had teaching support, but the one thing they didn't have was adequate facilities. So a big question for them on the improvement of their overall program for students was the development of better resources. And actually, one of the reasons that they joined the CDIO Collaborative, because then they could go back to their university and say, if you're a CDIO program, you have to have adequate resources for students and adequate workshops. So it gave them some leverage. Okay, we're now a CDIO program and we don't have this. We don't meet this standard in the CDIO. So they use it, much like you do for accreditation. The accreditation group says we have to have this. So you use it as leverage internally. To go ahead and do that. All right, and so forth. Faculty development. Is there a commitment of resources to faculty development? Is there a majority of faculty with competence in personal? And these next two, remember what I said, we're talking now the faculty as a whole, not does every faculty. So actually this represents my own inaccurate understanding, because I was thinking at the beginning that every faculty person, every faculty member had to be competent in personal skills and teaching and assessment skills, and so my measure was if the majority of the faculty. But it's not the understanding of what that standard is. It means your faculty as a whole, can you show you have that competence, not every single person. Assessment methods, matched learning outcomes, successful implementation, and then a continuous program improvement process under program evaluation. Now, your curriculum evaluation is still going to be data-driven. It's just that the data looks a little bit different from means and standard deviations. Okay? But the decisions you make about the improvement of your curriculum have to be based on evidence, have to be based on data. So it's not, well, you know, we've been working at this a long time, I think it's better. I'm happy you're coming to work. It's hard to persuade the person who's holding the resources to give you more resources on that kind of a report. But if you can provide evidence and use it. All right, let's look at some methods. And some of these we've already looked at. And we're not going to look at, I don't have slides on every thing, on all of them, so you can. But I just want.
Excuse me, in our department, the most profiles of teachers are full-time. But in other departments, the teachers are partial time. What about in this strategy?
Very difficult, because part-time faculty do not have responsibility for curriculum design. They don't have responsibility for advising students. They don't do committee work. Next is not to blame them for that. I'm not saying they should be doing it. They're not paid to do that. It's not their job. So if you have a department where everybody is part-time, I would say the number one question for, the number one need for redesigning the curriculum is to get to a point of increasing the number of full-time faculty. So maybe you collect all this data to show that we can't do it with part-time faculty. You really can't. Even if you're a small number, but you're full-time. When I worked with the program in pastoral theology, there were four full-time faculty. Okay? And one of them was on sabbatical. Okay. And me. But still, so we could not, we certainly invited the part-time faculty, but they did not come to any one of the meetings. And again, they're part-time faculty. They don't have, you know, that kind of commitment. So, but we had enough, it was a small faculty to begin with, and it's a small program. So we had enough, you know, with the four of us, the three faculty members and me, and then in a few months, the fourth person came on board, so came back from sabbatical, so, you know, worked on it. But yes, the strategy's really hard, unless there's very similar to another department that's really done this, and you say, all right, we're going to incorporate you in this new program in our. So if the one or two people in this other program area can join with another program area.
Or at least you paid some time for
Oh,
project,
pay them,
you know?
yes. Yes, say we want to,
You can launch a project and
we'll give you, you know, increase your stipend, and for that we expect you to work on this committee and work on curriculum. Yes, yes. But even so, it's like a consultant coming in, and not someone whose livelihood is invested in this. But yeah, very hard. So we talked about this. So you want to, at different stages, okay, you're now here doing your curriculum planning and designing. So, and that's what I said, you know, keep the documentation about, and the data, of course, from your validation studies. If there are any institutional studies, self-studies, I don't know if you have not an accreditation, but a review across the university. Is there a government evaluation, and the university has to do a self-study,
Yes, our national accreditation programs.
your
and,
national accreditation programs?
we have two steps. Minimum conditions, and next is accreditation. Both are based on
Self-assessment.
So when you go through that process, that becomes important data for your curriculum evaluation, all right?
Yeah,
So-
because there's also two levels of accreditation, program accreditation and university accreditation.
So look at that program. So in this case, you don't have to be concerned about the university accreditation, look at your program one, okay? And what kind of data do you have to collect to meet those requirements? And pull out of those reports the data that's going to answer your own evaluation questions, okay? And we already said this, curriculum mapping, save that as an important document. Resource allocation studies, you may in your program area be looking at budgeting issues. Sometimes that's an important question, particularly if you're trying to show the need for increased resources. All right, so we talked, that's kind of at the planning stage. But then when you're collecting information about the effectiveness of your curriculum, I like to look at, and that this entry means in terms of the students. Collect data about the students and from students when they enter the program, when they start the program in their first semester. Now, do they come in their first semester into your program area?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So right away in their first or second semester, and then look at them again when they exit. And there are some forms that we collect, some data we collect throughout on a continuous process throughout the curriculum. And again, when students come in, there are diagnostic tests, and I think there are for English anyway.
English and for
English, for
computer
computer abilities,
critical thinking.
computer basic.
Critical thinking, okay, look at the data, that's going to be important to you. Certainly the English, communication in English is your outcome, okay? And so you don't have to
Also, we have a survey about learning styles.
learning styles.
Learning styles,
Okay.
whether visual,
Now, all right, well, you're going to get my bias on this now. I think it's really interesting and terribly important to know about learning styles, and it's important for students to recognize their own learning styles. Okay? But for me as a teacher, I don't know what to do with that information.
Yes,
same thing.
that's
here.
right.
We do.
Because what does that mean? All right, I'm going to teach a lesson, I can't teach it 20 different ways. But what it does, so I can't personalize it to each one of you for every lesson. So the only thing that I can do is to make sure that when I'm teaching, I use a variety of methods. So that at some point, I'm going to hit your learning style.
Okay.
Okay? Because, when you see, and you've experienced that. So so I tend not to put a lot of stock in learning style inventories. Do you know which one they use? Do they use a standard one?
Yeah, let
Felderman.
The learning styles?
Felderman.
This one?
me check.
Felderman.
Oh, maybe. I don't know a lot of them, but I just know that across the board, while I think it's interesting and I like to do them for myself, because it validates for me what I already know about myself as a learner, okay? As a teacher, not terribly helpful.
We use in some sense to see the evolution, the time of the students. 10 years ago, most students
Oh, as a whole, the group, not individual students developing.
Yes, we have the individual data, but for me, it's interesting as a statistic in order to know how the students have been evolving in time.
As a
The
group,
learning style.
Yes.
groups of students.
The-
Okay.
the
So that they
learning
may be
style-
more visual now.
Yes.
The learning styles questionnaire we use is the one written by Solomon and Felder
Solomon and Felder.
at
Is that the Fel-
NCSU.
I was just gonna ask if that's the Felder from North Carolina.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, this one.
Wow. Okay. All right. So again, the point is, if you get useful information out of all of these tests, use that piece of it. You know, so it's not to say, oh, no, don't tell me now I have to report on all those tests for every student. No. Look at the general compilation in that sense, you know. It may be helpful to know that where students in the past learned primarily, and they learned effectively by listening, that now, on average, they're much more visual. On average, they have very short attention spans, okay, or shorter attention spans, because they, you know, they're here and there. Oh, look at this, we're on a computer, it's in the Dropbox, you know, it's, we're multitasking as you're sitting there, okay? You know, which is fine, because you do it. Okay, if you have admission reports and there's any useful information. Now, this next two, let me start with this one. We decided to interview students, and we just, you know, created a set of questions, and we can look at some in a minute. But basically, it was just to try to get at their motivation for coming to the program. You know, why did you come to MIT? Why did you come to aerospace engineering? And for us, since they're second-year students now, they're in their third semester, when they start aerospace, then I would ask them about what was your first year like? How, you know, what was the first 2 semesters, just to get them. And I would ask them about, well, I'll show you, but just in terms of what did they, how prepared did they think they were in some areas, teamwork, communication, how confident were they that they could that they had these skills. But again, it was an interview. So they were just general guideline questions, and the data really depended on how the student wanted to respond. We wanted to do something a little bit more formal in terms of this baseline skill assessment, and I'll show you the form that we developed, because we actually went to our program learning outcomes, and we wanted to know, from the student's perspective at the start of their program, what did they think their skill level was at each of those. Now that was, and we did that for, well, enough years to get over 4 years, because our intent was to then give it to them again when they were finishing the program, and we could try to get some gain scores. Well, there are a lot of problems with that, as you can imagine. I mean, this was a case too, we collected all the data, and then we didn't know what it meant when we summarized it. We didn't know how to interpret it, because what happens is, these are brand new students. They don't even know what some of those skills are, so they might, and even if they did, they reported themselves much more confident and competent than they were at the end. Because at the end, they knew what was involved in that skill. Okay? So, you know, you're looking at this and you're saying, how could after 3 years, you know, maybe we might have even repeated it, and tracked by students, you know, how could they drop in their perception of their competence? So the instrument never really worked well. But I will show you what a professor named William Lucas at MIT is doing with that kind of assessment of their confidence in how well they could do tasks. But but it's an attempt to do it at the beginning. So you'll see, just as we had baseline interviews, we had senior exit interviews, so the same thing. And I would do them as focus groups. I didn't do one-on-one interviews, unless everybody didn't show up for the focus group. So I would do it in groups of 5 or 6, and try to get that information. Now the senior surveys, these, and I'll show you some examples of the data, these are given by MIT. So we didn't create a survey for our program, because every year, at the end of the year, the university does a standardized survey that's used at many universities.
Yeah, here we use a standard exit survey that is a standard for all the universities.
Right. So I'll show you how I use that data. We talked yesterday about portfolios. This is course embedded, means it's inside the course. This is your learning assessment. Okay. The continuous improvement piece is the student ratings of instruction at the end of every semester. Instructor reflective memos at the end of every semester. We also tried to track how and when and where for how long students were using the lab, the workspace. So remember I said we made it accessible to them 24/7. So we wanted to try to have some way of just logging the number of hours students were there and what they were doing and how they were using the workspace. We didn't do a lot with it, okay, but we wanted to. And then of course alumni surveys. And again, MIT does the alumni surveys, so we don't specifically go. The only time we go to our own alumni in our program area is when we're doing this kind of validation. But generally across, and it's kind of how satisfied were you with your education at MIT. And again, we pull out what pertains to us. So let me give you an example. When I said MIT gives us a survey every year, but not the same one. In the odd-numbered years, they give this EBI survey. EBI is a company called Educational Benchmarking Incorporated. Okay? And every other year, the seniors take this. Now, they ask lots of questions about lots of things. For our perspective, we really didn't care about that in the program area, but what were we interested in? We were interested in our own program outcomes. Okay? So the question was something like, to what extent did Course 16, the aerospace program, help you to develop your abilities in, and they would have a whole list of things. For us, that's an important question, because those abilities related to the skills that are our program outcomes. So if they asked a question about to what extent did Course 16 help you to develop, they probably said, did your program, okay, or did your major help you to develop your abilities in mathematics or science? So it would have been this one. Okay. And the scale is a 1 to 7 scale. I think all the scale points are labeled. I just put here that 1 is the low end of the scale and 7 is the high. And nobody was scoring lower than a 3, so I just started the scale at 3, but it was really 1 to 7. And so for those, for example, 2.4 is, whatever I had called this one, this might be, my guess is that this is ethics, if it's in 2.5. Remember what I said about those are tough categories because there are a lot of things thrown into 2.4 and 2.5. It's the personal attributes and then the
2.4 is
professional.
thought and learning, and 2.5 is ethics.
But if you look at, let's look at 2.1, engineering, reasoning, and problem solving. There were 2 different items on the questionnaire. Okay? And I would track them in the full report. I would know what that item said. But they both related to 2.1, and that's why I called them that. They did not ask questions about the organizational context, and interestingly enough, there were no questions that would have fit our category of conceiving. They did ask about design, implementation, not anything about operation. But the point was, then we could track that every other year. So this is 2003, we had the data from 2001, 2005, and so on. And so we would look at those same items across years. So we did not reinvent the survey, we used the existing data. In the even numbered years, they took a survey that always made the COFI survey, so it's like the ACOFI. It's the COFI survey, and it's a consortium of finances, a consortium of something with finances in higher education. So the main intent was looking at how students are able to afford higher education. They asked a number of questions, and one of the questions they asked about their satisfaction in their major. These are the aerospace, and we have several. But the bars, again, this was a percentage from generally satisfied, percentage of generally, the scale was a satisfaction, so not at all satisfied, very satisfied, no, not at all, somewhat satisfied, whatever it was, all the way up to positive. And when I put it together, I didn't look at it, I just took the percentage of students who responded that they were generally satisfied or very satisfied, okay? So this is saying more than, and the bars, the red is the aerospace program, okay? The green is all of the School of Engineering, SOE, School of Engineering. And the blue is all of MIT. Because believe it or not, which I didn't know even before I went there, there are a lot of majors who are not engineers. You know, it is not all engineering at MIT. I mean, we have history majors, and we have mathematics majors, and language majors. So all the university together, right? So these were pretty good results for us.
Yeah.
And again, we could track them. So this is overall satisfaction with their major, availability of courses, intellectual excitement, yeah, and it's still pretty high across the whole university. In this survey, they also give us the data for comparing with other institutions. And they allow you to name your near competitors. And so they compare you with your near competitors. Now, the limitation there is that most of our near competitors didn't participate in the survey. So some of the comparisons with others were not very useful. Quality of instruction, quality of advising, so even on the advising level, you know, there's just a very personal connection with faculty and students. Laboratory experience, opportunities for class discussion. We're talking a lot there. Availability of instructors during office hours, okay, which is pretty high across the institute. Okay, and there's another thing. But the point is, again, and again, this fell to me as one of my jobs, was to take those institutional study reports and to figure out what it was telling us specifically about our program. So I didn't create the surveys, I had no part in analyzing them, thank goodness. We looked at this yesterday, student ratings and instruction, reflective memos, okay. I find this to be a useful, I found this when I was looking at competency-based learning models by this Voorhees, and unfortunately, I think this is the one, when I tried to look for it again, you know, for you to try to download it or put it in the Dropbox, when you retrieve this and you go to this website, you have to register to get the documents. So I don't know, I have to now search for how I got the document in the first place. Okay. Because I know I have a printed copy of it, and I had to have found it on another website. Oh, so are you looking to say, we'll assign him to look for that. Whether he was assigned or not, he's looking, he's searching. But it's a wonderful checklist if for an outcomes-based curriculum model, which is what we have. And so, now what you do have is you have this set of slides in the Dropbox, so you can pull out this list, and it goes on. I'm going to show you that. There's a section on faculty preparation, model preparation, student advisement, administration, okay. And again, you know, choose the questions that make sense, but I thought there were a lot of very good ones. Have the faculty been oriented to the shift from teacher-centered delivery to student-centered? Okay? And it is a shift. Orient, prepare the faculty.
Got it.
You found it?
Yeah. There's a free version in a FTP site.
And can you put that in our Dropbox?
Sure. Will do.
Thank you. Have faculty been involved in conceptualizing, identifying, and delivering program outcomes? Now notice this is not coming from the CDIO book or the CDIO approach, but it's saying, have you involved the faculty in identifying the program outcomes? Okay. Have faculty, my guess is, now that I'm saying this, my guess is if you go to the article, it says checklist for evaluating competency-based models. And then wherever you see the word program outcomes, the original checklist probably said competency. Okay, that was a change I made. All right. Have faculty received training in writing learning outcomes that are measurable? Can faculty implement classroom assessment techniques to evaluate student learning? Okay. So just a great checklist. Now let me come back to this one. There are a couple of different approaches to this. In some curriculum redesign efforts, or when some education specialists work with faculty, they spend a lot of time teaching people how to write good learning outcomes and good program outcomes. And you can do that, and then people can write them. This takes a lot of time. My perspective is, if you have someone on board, like if they hired me, I mean, I do this, I can do this in my sleep. So if you tell me, well, let me give you the example again. If you tell me what your course is about, I can write you a set of learning outcomes. Okay? So, do you want to spend your time learning how to do it, or do you want to say, let someone else just write them for you, and you know that they're written as learning outcomes, and then you focus, you move on from there. Because your interest is writing learning outcomes just for your course. It's not, I'm going to be writing learning outcomes for everyone. So if you have a teaching learning center who has expertise on this, I'm giving this task to Alessandra, she can write them. So for example, again, when I was working with this, with a group of theologians to reform their curriculum, I could have spent several meetings with them teaching them how to write good learning outcomes. I can tell you now, I don't think they would have been very excited about those meetings, although they were excited about the rest of the process. So what I did was to take all the existing course syllabi, whether or not they had learning outcomes in them, but I can read the description, I can read the course content, and because I was in that program, I had a pretty good idea. I just translated that into learning outcomes, and then gave it to them and said, look at these learning outcomes. Does this represent the main point you're trying to do with your course? Okay? So, and again, it's a different, there are some education people that think, again, it's one of those, because it's my discipline, I think everybody should be able to do it. I don't think that way, all right? But some would say, no, don't ever write them for them. Teach them how to write their own. So there's a little bit of a, so whether or not you're trained in it, it's nice to be able to recognize a learning outcome when you see one. Does the model, here we're talking about the curriculum model, does your curriculum relate to and further the institution's stated mission? Okay. How do industry-related outcomes draw from how do industry-related outcomes, okay, your outcomes related to your discipline, draw from state and national standards and credentials, okay? So within systems engineering, is there a profession of systems engineers? Okay. So it's, it's worth looking at their national standards. Okay. What do they say are the important characteristics?
But in our case, it's a coffee.
Oh, it's a coffee.
Yes.
Okay.
But
And
the
at that
coffee
level-
does not.
They're not focused yet on program outcomes, are they?
No.
No.
Okay.
No, and the last work about engineering curriculum and systems engineering was around 1998, about a long time ago.
Yeah, it would be worth looking at the ABET criteria. When we looked at ABET criteria, and you probably have, when we looked at it, here together, we looked at ABET criteria, we looked at criterion 3, that's where all those general learning outcomes are. But criterion 8 is specific disciplinary knowledge for most branches of engineering. So they may have a section on systems engineers, but telematics might be called something else. But that might be a place to go. That's not written as outcomes. It's really just a list of disciplinary content. But it may be helpful. Does the institution have a publicized statement on expectations of student learning? Okay. If so, are program outcomes aligned with its statement? So are there expectations, are there objectives at the ISAISI level? If so, align them. And do you like this one? Are the program outcomes accessible? I didn't make these up, though I probably changed this. I probably said, are the competencies accessible? And interesting, they used accessible, not measurable, which is good. Student advisement. Now, in the approach that we looked at this week, we didn't talk at all about student advisement. We didn't talk specifically about student motivation, which is Aldo's question at the beginning. But it may be an area, how are learners oriented to student-centered outcomes-based, the outcomes-based paradigm? This is an important piece, okay? Just as the faculty need to be oriented to this new approach, where students are going to be active in the classroom, so do those students, okay? You don't want to assume that now it's student-centered, of course they're going to be excited. We're focusing on the students. They absolutely will not be. They are very comfortable sitting and listening
Yes. Yes.
and multitasking and, don't call on me. Just let me sit here in the back of the room, in the very last row of the auditorium, okay? And don't make me do anything. And the thing is, it's not that they're not learning, but they have learned in that style and they have been successful learners, otherwise they wouldn't be in university. So if you're going to shift this now and put the responsibility for learning on them, you're responsible for what you learn, and the only way that you're going to learn it, or I'm going to know that you're learning it, is if you're actively engaged. So the important thing is not just to tell them the difference, but why. Why is this going to be better for them in the long run? Why will this be a better approach? But you need to orient them. You need to explain to them what does all these new program outcomes mean. And the fact that now you're explaining to them that by the time you finish this program, you're going to be ready to engineer. You're going to have the skills, but only if you take responsibility for your own learning. But it takes, so what we do in that first course in Unified Engineering is that the first couple of weeks, they have, that's the course that has all those topics. They have some of the lectures in that, because it meets every day, and some of the lectures are just called Unified Concepts. And this is the opportunity for them, so that during the course of the week, if they've just been studying 2 different disciplines with 2 different instructors, the day they have a Unified Concepts lecture, it's pointing out the linkages between those 2 topics, whatever they do that week. Well, they use some of those Unified Concept lecture times for just this purpose, orienting the students. Okay. So it's very important. Are learners aware of how they may import their pre-existing competencies into the model? Yeah. Don't assume that everyone is starting, and don't give them the impression you don't know how to do any of this, and now you're going to learn it. Okay. Many of them have, because they have different backgrounds. Are learners encouraged to monitor their own progress in developing the expected program outcomes? So there are frequent opportunities for self-reflection, for reflection and self-assessment throughout the program. So when you look at your curriculum, the vision of the curriculum and where you're headed, and finally when you have a draft of what the curriculum looks like, and this is what it would be. Oh, administration. Is there a commitment at the top of the organization to the model? Okay. And I know for sure you have a commitment at least at the dean's level. And that's terribly important. Okay. Adequate resources available to implement and sustain the model. Well, certainly in this planning process, I don't know about implementing and sustaining, I suspect they will be, because ISAZE is, giving resources for the curriculum planning process. Time for you to do that, resources to bring me here this week, so there's a commitment to invest into the curriculum redesign. How will the program outcomes be recorded? Just keeping track of that. But most of the time you may need to do that in your program area, because again, the recording of grades at the institutional level doesn't track this part. And what steps have been taken with other organizations and entities to ensure that competencies are portable? In other words, I don't know what steps with the other organizations, but the idea of being portable is that now they take them with them. They take them with them. So it could mean, better cooperation with those employers and saying, now we're sending you students with all of these skills. They're coming in with these skills. Particularly if you've asked them to begin with, what skills do you think are important? And I would say, we're setting them. And what mechanisms are in place for evaluation. And again, you may want to, in your program area, identify maybe a group of 2 or 3 people who are going to be the people who will monitor the progress of the curriculum and who will keep track of the evaluation data. Because if it's scattered all across the program area, you may not be aware of all the data that you're collecting. And it doesn't have to be an evaluation specialist. Okay. Or maybe you can contract some time with the Teaching Learning Center and have a person who is a consultant to your program, and X part of their, a certain part of their responsibilities are for you, and that person helps you to track.
Do you think it's also a good idea to hire somebody maybe doesn't know this model or the original idea or the well points you have to follow, but maybe this person can study initially the whole idea of the proposal, of the initiative that the program has.
Right. If you hire a consultant who is going to do program evaluation, part of their expertise and their starting point is to get to know your program, get to know the vision of your curriculum, get to know what you've already done, and then begin to suggest kinds of data and evidence you might want to collect.
No, but I mean, it's a good idea to hire somebody who knows nothing about, for example, CDIO, but with the purpose of helping supporting the process,
Right.
in order to review the advances and maybe I can say the verbs that we are using for describing competences and how complete is until what point everything is a kind of project leader, but yes, what do you think about that?
It depends on what the available resources are. Someone who is skilled in program evaluation does not need to be an expert in the content area, because they're coming in to help you for the strategies. Now, if you specifically, your curriculum wants to be a CDIO curriculum, it will certainly help if that person is already familiar or at least becomes familiar. But having said that, there really is very little in the CDIO approach that is really not part of curriculum design, and any curriculum designer knows this process. Okay. I think what's specific maybe is the idea of this teaching in the context of the profession, okay, which is such an important point. But a curriculum designer or a curriculum evaluator or program, however, would know all of these concepts about curriculum design that we've talked about, even though they're not familiar with engineering or with CDIO specifically. Okay. Having said that, if at the same time you can get someone who has had experience working with engineers or technical areas, first of all, it helps to establish credibility a lot easier. Okay? And I say that because, well, for example, for myself, my background is in curriculum design and program evaluation, but I was in teacher education. But I got to MIT not because I was coming from teacher education, but because prior to that, I had worked a number of years doing evaluation with engineers. I worked with Bell Labs. I worked with United Technologies, who are the people I see your elevators are Otis elevators. They're part of United Technologies, which is a company that I worked for. So I had had not only the experience with the process in teacher education, I had a background in engineering, not a background, academic background. So I didn't need to be an engineer myself, though that might have, you know, given me a few more points. But the fact that I had worked with engineers. So that's kind of the best case. But I would say you really need to look for someone who has, you know, that orientation toward instructional design or curriculum design. Because then they can figure this out with engineering.
Because in fact it's easier to find an engineering who supports, in a way at least, the process than finding an expert in these stuffs, you know. At least in our media is that.
In your area, yeah. Yeah. Great, I think, do we have, is our copy over here? Okay. So, I'm just gonna look at the summary and then I want to come back. We'll take a coffee break and then we'll come back and just look at a few examples, but then I want to tackle those questions. So,
It's not outside.
it's not outside?
No.
No, we should.
No.
Milena!
Yeah.